Cedar Hollow woke slowly. The town always did. Morning arrived first as a pale silver mist that drifted down from the low hills and settled along the narrow streets. Then came the soft amber glow behind lace curtains. A porch light clicked off. A screen door sighed open. Somewhere in the distance, a pickup truck engine turned over with a low, patient rumble. And at exactly 6 o'clock, the lights inside Morning Hearth Cafe flickered on. Emily Harper stood alone behind the counter, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug still empty of coffee. She liked this moment before the machines hummed and before the bell above the door announced the first customer. This was the quiet that belonged only to her. The cafe smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. The floorboards held the memory of decades of footsteps. The chalkboard menu leaned slightly to the left no matter how many times she straightened it. 3 years ago, this place had not existed in her life. 3 years ago, she had lived in a city that never slept, in an apartment that overlooked a highway instead of trees. She had worn blazers instead of sweaters and answered emails at midnight. She had smiled in conference rooms under fluorescent lights while something inside her quietly unraveled. She hadn't meant to leave. There was no dramatic argument. No final slammed door. Just a Tuesday morning when she looked at her reflection in a dark computer screen and didn't recognize the woman staring back. So she packed what fit into her car. And she drove. 7 hours north. She stopped when she saw a weathered wooden sign at the edge of a narrow 2-lane road. Welcome to Cedar Hollow, population 1,842. She told herself it would only be temporary. A month, maybe 2. But Cedar Hollow had a way of stretching time gently, like warm bread rising under a kitchen towel. Emily poured coffee grounds into the machine and listened as it began to brew. The sound was steady, comforting. Outside, the mist began to thin. The bell above the cafe door chimed. "Morning, Em," called Mrs. Delaney, wrapped in her blue wool coat. "Morning," Emily replied with a soft smile. Mrs. Delaney had lived in Cedar Hollow her entire life. She claimed she could predict snow by the way her knees ached and that the big oak tree in town square had once been struck by lightning and survived out of sheer stubbornness. She ordered the same thing every day, half CAF with a splash of oat milk. Emily prepared it without asking. Routine was something she had learned to appreciate. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. But it was steady. And steady felt safe. By 7:30, the cafe filled with quiet conversation. A contractor with paint-stained jeans. A young mother balancing a toddler on her hip. 2 high school students whispering over shared earbuds. Life here did not rush. It unfolded. Late that morning, after the first wave had thinned, the door opened again. The man who stepped inside carried the weight of somewhere else. He paused just beyond the threshold, as though adjusting to the warmth. He wore a heavy gray coat, the kind built for colder places. His hair was silver at the temples. His posture straight but tired. His eyes moved around the room slowly, carefully. Like someone looking for a memory. Emily noticed him immediately. "Good morning," she said gently. He stepped forward. "Black coffee," he replied. His voice was calm, but it carried a softness underneath. She poured it and set the mug down. "Passing through?" she asked. He hesitated. Not exactly. He chose the small table near the window, the one that faced the hill leading down toward Pine Lake. For several minutes, he did nothing but hold the mug between his hands. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Emily returned to wiping the counter, but she felt something shift in the room. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just different. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the thinning clouds and touched the edge of the hill. The mist lifted slowly, revealing the rooftops below. Cedar Hollow looked almost fragile in that light. The man opened his notebook and began to write. Emily watched only briefly. Then she turned away. In Cedar Hollow, people were allowed their silences. And sometimes, that was where healing began. The man returned the next morning. Emily noticed him before the bell above the door finished ringing. Cedar Hollow was wrapped in a thin layer of frost, the kind that made the sidewalks glitter faintly under early light. The cafe windows were fogged from the warmth inside, blurring the world beyond into soft shapes and color. He stepped in quietly, brushing cold air in with him. "Morning," Emily said. He nodded once. "Good morning. Black coffee?" A faint smile touched his mouth. "You remember. I try to." She poured it fresh. He chose the same table by the window. Outside, Pine Lake lay still beneath a pale gray sky. The trees along the shore had begun to shift color, gold threading into green, red gathering at the edges of leaves. He took out the leather notebook again. Emily watched only for a second this time. Something about the way he wrote, slowly, deliberately, felt less like journaling and more like excavation. As though he were carefully brushing dirt from something fragile. The cafe filled gradually. At 8:15, the high school history teacher argued gently about baseball with Mr. Carter, who had not left town in 40 years. At 8:30, the mail carrier came in, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Through it all, the man remained near the window. Present, but separate. Around 9, when the rush had passed, Emily approached his table with a small plate. "Pumpkin loaf," she said. "On the house. I made too much." He looked up, surprised. "That's kind of you. It's dangerous to drink coffee on an empty stomach," she replied lightly. He studied her for a moment, as if deciding something. "My name is Thomas," he said finally. "Emily." He nodded, as if the exchange mattered. Outside, wind brushed through the trees along the hill, scattering a few early leaves down the slope. "You're not from here," Thomas said gently. It wasn't an accusation. Emily leaned against the back of the empty chair across from him. "No. How long have you been in Cedar Hollow?" 3 years. Thomas absorbed that. That's long enough to belong. She considered the words. Belong. It had taken her nearly 2 years to stop introducing herself as new in town. Even now, some part of her still felt temporary. "I suppose it is," she said quietly. Thomas broke off a piece of pumpkin loaf but didn't eat it yet. "I left here when I was 19, he said. "Thought the world was somewhere else." "And was it?" For a while. His gaze drifted to the lake. "I built a life. Career. Marriage. Children. The whole architecture." There was no bitterness in his tone. Just distance. "My wife used to love autumn here," he continued. "She said the trees looked like they were trying too hard to be beautiful." Emily smiled faintly. "That sounds like something someone would only say if they loved it." Thomas's eyes warmed. She did. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable, just full. "Are you visiting?" Emily asked. "No," he said. "I sold the house in Boston." The statement landed softly but firmly. "I bought back my parents' cabin near Pine Lake. It needed work." "Why come back?" she asked before she could stop herself. Thomas did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward the window. "The city felt louder after she was gone," he said at last. Silence there was heavy. Here, silence feels like space. Emily understood that more than she expected. When she had first arrived, the quiet of Cedar Hollow had frightened her. The absence of sirens. The absence of constant motion. But slowly, she had discovered that quiet could hold you instead of press against you. Thomas finally took a bite of the loaf. He nodded once in approval. "Very good," he said. She felt an unexpected flicker of pride. "You'll need more than coffee if you're fixing up a cabin," she said. "Winters here aren't gentle." Thomas's eyes shifted back to her. "I'm not sure I am either," he replied softly. The honesty in his voice did not ask for sympathy. Only acknowledgement. Emily gave him that. "Well," she said, straightening slightly, "you'll find people here who know how to fix roofs, mend fences, and bring casseroles without asking permission." A small chuckle escaped him. "That's reassuring." As she returned behind the counter, Emily noticed something subtle inside herself. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't attraction. It was recognition. Not of him, but of the quiet bravery it takes to start again in a place that remembers who you used to be. Outside, the frost began to melt under strengthening sunlight. The mist over Pine Lake thinned further, revealing ripples where a single duck crossed the water's surface. Thomas closed his notebook after another few lines. When he stood to leave, he paused at the counter. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, not a question. Emily nodded. "I'll be here." The bell chimed as he stepped back into the cool morning air. For a moment, the cafe felt larger after he left. Not emptier, just wider. Emily wiped down the counter slowly, glancing once toward the window where he had sat. Outside, the leaves along the hill shimmered in full daylight now. Cedar Hollow did not rush. It unfolded. And something, quiet and nearly invisible, had begun to unfold inside her too. The first real cold front arrived on a Thursday. It came in quietly, without drama, just a steady drop in temperature and a wind that carried the scent of pine and distant snow. By morning, Pine Lake had turned a darker shade of blue, its surface restless under the shifting sky. Emily noticed the change before she stepped outside. The air felt thinner when she unlocked the cafe door. Sharper. Inside, Morning Hearth seemed smaller against the cold, warmer, more deliberate. She turned on the lamps instead of relying on daylight. The soft yellow glow settled over the wooden tables like a blanket. At 6:12, the bell chimed. Thomas. He brushed his hands together as if shaking off more than just the cold. Colder today, Emily said. Winter's rehearsing, he replied. She poured his coffee without asking. He sat by the window again, but this time he didn't take out his notebook right away. Instead, he watched the lake. After a moment, Emily walked over. You make progress on the cabin? She asked. Thomas nodded slowly. I found my father's old toolbox in the shed, he said. Rust on the hinges. Still smelled like motor oil. He paused. It's strange what survives. Emily leaned against the back of the chair across from him, hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. What needed fixing? The porch steps, he said. One board had split down the center. And now? Now it holds. There was something in the way he said it, not just about wood. Outside, wind pressed against the cafe windows. Leaves skittered down the sidewalk like small, restless thoughts. Thomas finally pulled out the notebook. I used to write letters, he said unexpectedly. To who? My wife. Even when she was sitting in the same room. Emily smiled faintly. That's romantic. It was practical, he corrected gently. There were things I could say on paper that I struggled to say out loud. He turned a page. I stopped writing after she passed. The words hung between them, delicate but steady. And now? Emily asked softly. I'm trying again. She nodded. Grief had a way of silencing people. Of shrinking language down to the bare essentials. She had felt it herself, not from death, but from the quiet ending of something she once believed would last forever. There had been no funeral for her marriage. No ceremony. No casseroles delivered to her door. Just a slow erosion of shared space. Sometimes that kind of loss left no clear edges to mourn. The cafe door opened again, and cold air rushed in with a burst of laughter. Two construction workers stomped snow-dusted boots on the mat. Emily excused herself and returned behind the counter. Life resumed its small rhythms, orders taken, milk steamed, coins exchanged. Thomas remained at the window. When the rush faded, he approached the counter instead of waiting for her. Do you ever miss it? He asked. Miss what? The life before this. The question wasn't intrusive, just curious. Emily wiped her hands on a towel and considered. I miss who I thought I was going to be, she said finally. Thomas studied her. And who was that? Someone very certain, she replied. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Certainty is overrated. She laughed softly. I'm starting to think so. Outside, a thin cloud layer shifted, allowing sunlight to spill briefly over the lake. The water flashed silver. Thomas followed her gaze. She loved that light, he said. Said it made everything look possible. Emily felt something gentle in her chest, not sorrow, not pity. Just warmth. What was her name? She asked. Margaret. He said it like a complete sentence. Margaret. The name settled into the space without heaviness. She would have liked this place, Emily said quietly. Thomas nodded. She did. The wind eased outside. For a moment, Cedar Hollow seemed suspended between breaths. You know, Thomas said after a while, I almost didn't come back. Why? I was afraid the town wouldn't feel the same. And is it? He looked around the cafe, at the worn floors, the chalkboard menu, the soft lamplight. No, he said honestly. But neither do I. Emily understood. Places change. People change. but sometimes they change in ways that allow you to meet them again. The bell above the door chimed as a young couple stepped in, hands intertwined against the cold. Thomas glanced at them, then back at Emily. "I'll let you get back to work." He gathered his notebook. Before he left, he paused at the counter. "Emily," he said carefully, "thank you for the pumpkin loaf yesterday." "You're welcome. And, for remembering my coffee." She smiled. Some things are easy to remember. He stepped back into the afternoon light. The sky had cleared entirely now, a crisp blue stretching over Cedar Hollow. Emily watched him walk up the hill toward Pine Lake, his steps steady, deliberate. She realized something then. Healing didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived disguised as routine, as shared silence, as coffee poured at exactly the right temperature. The wind had quieted, the lake shimmered, and inside Morning Hearth, something gentle continued to take shape, not rushed, not forced. Just unfolding. Saturday mornings in Cedar Hollow carried a different kind of energy. Not hurried, never hurried, but fuller. The sidewalks filled with slow-moving conversations. The hardware store door opened and closed in steady rhythm. A farmer's truck parked crooked near the square, its bed stacked with crates of late-season apples. Emily arrived earlier than usual. She liked Saturdays. There was comfort in knowing the cafe would be busy. That people would gather not just for coffee, but for company. She tied her apron, turned the sign to open, and breathed in the scent of cinnamon she had sprinkled over fresh pumpkin muffins. Outside, the sky was a clear, pale blue. The cold felt sharper now, more committed. The bell above the door chimed at 6:07. "Thomas." He stamped his boots lightly before stepping inside. "You're early," Emily said. "I brought something," he replied. He held a small brown paper bag. She raised an eyebrow. "That's suspicious." He smiled faintly and placed it on the counter. Inside were 3 apples, imperfect, slightly uneven, their red skins streaked with gold. "From the tree behind the cabin," he said. "It hasn't been tended in years, but it still produces." Emily lifted one, turning it in her hand. "It's beautiful." "It's stubborn," he corrected gently. She liked that. "Thank you," she said. "I'll make something with them." Thomas took his usual seat by the window. Today, however, the cafe filled quickly. By 7, every table was occupied. The sound of low laughter and clinking cups layered softly over one another. A child dropped a spoon. Someone told a story about last winter's storm knocking out power for 3 days. Thomas watched it all with quiet attention. Emily moved efficiently behind the counter, but her eyes occasionally drifted toward the window. Around 9, when the rush thinned just enough for breathing space, she stepped outside briefly to collect a delivery crate. The cold surprised her. It had deepened. The wind off Pine Lake carried a bite that slipped through fabric and found skin. Across the street, she noticed Thomas standing near the old oak tree in the town square. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just looking up at its branches, now half bare. After a moment, she crossed the street. "Taking inventory?" she asked lightly. Thomas glanced down. "I used to climb this tree," he said. "When I was 8 or 9. That seems dangerous." "It was," he replied, eyes soft. "My mother hated it." The branches creaked faintly in the wind. Emily studied the thick trunk, the grooves carved by time. "It survived lightning," she said. Thomas nodded. "So did we," he added quietly. The words settled between them. Not heavy, just true. From somewhere down the block, church bells rang, a simple melody marking the hour. Thomas's gaze drifted toward Pine Lake. "I walked down to the shore yesterday," he said. "The dock's still there." Emily followed his line of sight. "It's not very sturdy," she warned. "It never was." A faint smile crossed his face. "I stood there for a while. And I realized I've been remembering her as she was at the end." Emily didn't interrupt. "But that's not how she lived," he continued. "Margaret was loud. She sang off-key. She painted the kitchen cabinets yellow without asking me first." Emily laughed softly. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Thomas said. The wind shifted again, lifting a swirl of leaves around their feet. "I don't want my last memory to define the rest of my life," he said. The honesty in his voice felt steady, not fragile. Emily understood that kind of decision. I think, she said slowly, we hold on to the ending because it feels final. Like it gives shape to something we couldn't control. Thomas considered this. And letting go of the ending? He asked. Maybe that's how we let the middle matter again. For a moment, neither spoke. The oak tree stood above them, scarred, rooted, enduring. Across the square, someone opened the door to Morning Hearth. The bell chimed faintly even from outside. Thomas looked at the cafe, then back at Emily. You've built something good here, he said. She hesitated. I didn't build it alone. The town was already here. That's not what I meant. His gaze held hers gently. You stayed. The word lingered. Staying had once felt like surrender. Now, it felt like choice. They walked back across the street together. Inside, warmth wrapped around them instantly. Emily returned behind the counter. Thomas resumed his place by the window. But something subtle had shifted. Later that afternoon, after the cafe emptied and she locked the door, Emily unwrapped the apples again. She sliced one carefully. The scent was bright and crisp, sharp enough to make her eyes close briefly. She decided she would bake something simple. Nothing complicated. Just flour, butter, cinnamon, and apples from a tree that had survived neglect and still chosen to bear fruit. As evening settled over Cedar Hollow, the sky deepened into a muted lavender. The lights in the cafe glowed softly against the growing dark. Emily paused by the window before leaving. Up on the hill, she could just make out the faint outline of the cabin near Pine Lake. A single light flickered on inside. Not bright, not dramatic, just steady. She felt something in her chest loosen, not a dramatic unraveling, not a revelation. Just a quiet widening. Healing, she was beginning to understand, did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like light in a window. Seen from a distance. Steady. And real. The first snow came earlier than anyone expected. It began just after midnight, light at first, almost uncertain, drifting down in slow, quiet spirals beneath the street lamps. By morning, Cedar Hollow had softened under a thin white blanket. Emily woke before her alarm. For a moment, she didn't know why. Then she noticed the silence. Snow had a way of changing the acoustics of the world. It hushed everything, footsteps, engines, even thought. She stepped to the window of her small house on Birch Street and pulled the curtain aside. The town looked newly drawn. Rooflines smoothed, sidewalks erased, pine trees bowed gently under the weight. Her breath fogged the glass. There was something about first snow that felt like permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to begin again. She dressed warmly and drove carefully toward Morning Hearth, tires crunching over fresh powder. No other cars had yet marked the road. The cafe looked smaller in the snow, cozier. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and turned on the lights. Warmth bloomed gradually. She brewed coffee, the rich scent curling through the quiet room. Outside, the sky shifted from gray to pale silver. At 6:20, the bell chimed. Thomas. Snow dusted his coat and shoulders. He paused just inside the doorway, taking in the warmth. I was hoping you'd still open, he said. Snow isn't an excuse here, Emily replied lightly. It's tradition. He removed his gloves slowly, fingers slightly stiff from the cold. Black coffee, she said, already pouring. He watched her for a moment. You like this weather, he observed. I do. Why? She considered. It feels honest, she said. Nothing hidden. Just clean and quiet. Thomas nodded thoughtfully and carried his mug to the window. Pine Lake was barely visible now through the falling snow. The hills had dissolved into soft white outlines. For a long while, they said nothing. The cafe remained nearly empty, only one early riser collecting coffee to go before heading out to plow driveways. The silence was not heavy. It was companionable. After a while, Thomas spoke. I walked to the lake before coming here. In this? Emily asked. He shrugged slightly. I wanted to see it like this. And? The dock was covered completely, he said. You couldn't tell where wood ended and water began. Emily leaned against the counter. Sometimes that's a relief. Thomas looked at her carefully. What do you mean? She hesitated, then answered honestly. When the lines blur. Between past and present. Between who you were and who you are. It doesn't feel so abrupt. He studied the steam rising from his mug. I used to think clarity was everything, he said. Plans, structure, knowing what came next. And now? Now I think maybe not knowing is what keeps us awake. A faint smile tugged at her mouth. Or what finally lets us sleep. He chuckled softly. Outside, snow thickened, swirling under the weak morning light. Emily stepped around the counter and joined him at the window. They stood side by side. The lake was almost entirely white now, a single dark patch where water refused to freeze near the center. Thomas noticed it too. Margaret used to say that Spot was stubborn, he murmured. That it reminded her of me. Are you stubborn? Emily asked. Less than I thought. She glanced at him. That's not a bad thing. No, he agreed quietly. It's just different. Snowflakes gathered briefly on the window before melting into thin trails. Emily felt something calm settle in her chest. Not excitement, not anticipation, just steadiness. Thomas cleared his throat gently. I found a box in the cabin yesterday, he said. Old photographs. She listened. There was one of Margaret standing on that dock. She was wearing a ridiculous red scarf. It kept flying into her face. Emily smiled at the image. What did you do with it? I put it back, he admitted. I wasn't ready. She nodded. Healing did not obey deadlines. The cafe door opened again, letting in a gust of snow and laughter. Two teenagers burst in, cheeks flushed, boots soaked. Life resumed in small, ordinary ways. Thomas finished his coffee slowly. When he stood to leave, he paused. Would you like to see the cabin sometime? He asked carefully. It's not much yet, but I think it remembers how to be warm. The invitation was simple, uncomplicated. Emily considered the snow, the lake, the quiet persistence of this town. I'd like that, she said. His expression softened. Maybe when the weather clears. She nodded. After he left, she remained by the window a moment longer. Snow continued to fall. The world outside was blurred and gentle. Inside morning hearth, warmth held steady. Emily realized something then. The snow did not erase what came before. It simply covered it long enough to let the ground rest. And sometimes, rest was the first step toward growth. She turned back to the counter as another customer approached. Outside, Cedar Hollow disappeared into white. Inside, the light remained on. Steady. Waiting. On the first truly warm evening of spring, the power went out across Maple Street. It happened just after 8:17 p.m., right when porch lights were switching on and televisions were humming to life. 1 second the street glowed in its familiar golden way. The next, everything blinked into darkness. A few seconds later, the sky seemed bigger. Mara was in her kitchen when it happened. She had just finished washing dishes, hands still damp, when the house fell silent. The refrigerator stopped humming. The clock on the microwave went blank. She froze. For a moment, the old reflex kicked in, the one that expected darkness to bring something heavy with it. Fear, loneliness, that hollow drop in her chest. But instead, there was only stillness. She walked to the front door and opened it. All along Maple Street, doors were opening too. Porch by porch, silhouettes appeared. Someone laughed nervously. A child squealed, "Did we break it? Guess we're off-grid tonight." Mr. Alvarez called from 3 houses down. Without the artificial glow, the sky was clearer than Mara had seen in years. Stars pricked through the indigo like quiet promises. Mrs. Chen stepped onto her porch holding a lantern. "Well," she said calmly, "this seems like an invitation." "An invitation to what?" Ellie asked, clutching her sketchbook. "To be together," Mrs. Chen replied. Within 15 minutes, Maple Street looked like something from another era. Candles flickered in mason jars. Someone dragged out folding chairs. Blankets were spread on driveways. Phones were checked once, then tucked away. There was no signal anyway. Mara found herself sitting on the curb beside Jonah and a few neighbors. The air smelled like warm pavement and someone's citronella candle. "This is kind of nice," Jonah said. "It is," Mara agreed. Mr. Alvarez disappeared into his garage and returned with an old acoustic guitar. The strings were slightly out of tune, but no one seemed to mind. He began playing a soft, familiar melody, something simple and steady. Ellie leaned against her mom and whispered, "It feels like summer." It feels like slowing down, Mara said. As the night deepened, conversations did too. Without screens, people talked differently. They told stories. They shared small confessions. They asked questions that didn't have quick answers. Jonah admitted he'd been thinking about changing careers. Mrs. Chen spoke about losing her husband years ago and how she'd once been afraid of evenings like this. But I learned something, she said gently. Darkness doesn't mean something is missing. Sometimes it means something quieter is present. Mara let that settle in her chest. The power outage lasted 3 hours. In those 3 hours, Maple Street remembered something. They remembered how to look up. They remembered how to listen. They remembered that silence isn't empty, it's spacious. When the lights flickered back on, a collective groan rippled down the street. Too bright, someone laughed. Porch lights hummed to life. Televisions blinked back on. The familiar world returned. But something had shifted. Before heading back inside, Mrs. Chen raised her lantern one more time. Same time next week? She asked. Power outage or not, Jonah replied. Mara lingered for a moment longer under the stars. For years, darkness had meant isolation to her. Tonight, it meant connection. As she stepped back into her house, she didn't feel the old heaviness. She felt grounded, held, and quietly grateful that sometimes, when the lights go out, we get to see what truly shines. 3 days after the night of flickering lights, Mara found the old wooden box again. It had been sitting on the top shelf of her closet for years, moved from apartment to apartment, house to house, always packed, never opened. Until that afternoon. The house was quiet. A soft breeze pushed through the open windows, carrying the smell of fresh cut grass. Jonah had gone to work. The street outside hummed gently with weekday life. Mara dragged a chair into the closet and reached for the box. It was lighter than she remembered. Inside were photographs, ticket stubs, a dried lavender sprig tied with twine, and a stack of letters. Some had never been mailed. She sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor and opened the first one. The handwriting was younger, looser, hurried. It was addressed to someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. She didn't need to read it to remember what it said. The apology, the explanations, the desperate hope that if she just found the right words, everything could be repaired. She had written it during a time when she believed closure had to be granted by someone else. She smiled gently now. Closure, she had learned, could be something you give yourself. She opened another letter. This one was to her younger self. It was written on a sleepless night years ago. She remembered sitting at a tiny kitchen table in a one-bedroom apartment, feeling like life had already slipped too far away from her plans. The letter had been full of advice. Warnings. Please to be stronger. She exhaled slowly. I was already strong, she whispered to the empty room. The truth was softer now. Strength hadn't been about holding everything together. It had been about staying. Staying through grief. Staying through uncertainty. Staying when leaving would have been easier. She carried the box to the living room and sat by the window. Outside, Ellie was riding her bike in slow circles on the sidewalk. Mr. Alvarez waved as he watered his garden. The world felt steady. Mara took out a blank sheet of paper. For a long moment, she just held the pen. Then she began writing. Not to the past. Not to someone who left. Not to someone who hurt her. She wrote to herself, today's version. Dear you. You made it through things you once thought would break you. You learned how to sit in silence without running from it. You learned that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. You are allowed to forgive the version of you who didn't know better. You are allowed to release the weight you've been carrying. You are allowed to move forward, without dragging yesterday behind you. She paused. Outside, Ellie's laughter rang down the street. Mara folded the letter carefully. But this time, she didn't tuck it into the box. She placed it on the kitchen counter. Visible. Real. Later that evening, Jonah noticed it. What's this? He asked gently. A letter, she replied. Are you sending it? No, she said, smiling. I think I'm keeping it. He nodded, understanding more than she had explained. That night, Mara carried the wooden box back to the closet. But before closing it, she removed the unsent letters addressed to the past. She didn't tear them up. She didn't burn them. She simply tied them together with the lavender twine and placed them at the bottom of the box. Not hidden, just finished. As she turned off the bedroom light, she felt something shift inside her again, not dramatically, not loudly. Just a quiet settling. There are some letters we don't send because they're not meant to change someone else. They're meant to change us. And sometimes, healing isn't about rewriting the past. It's about choosing not to reread it every day. Mara closed her eyes. Outside, Maple Street was calm. Inside, she was too. Mara woke before her alarm. For a moment, she didn't move. There was a soft gray light spilling through the curtains, the kind that makes the world feel unfinished in the gentlest way. Beside her, Jonah was still asleep. The house was quiet. She reached for her phone out of habit. Then paused. Instead of scrolling, she set it back down. The old version of her mornings had been rushed, coffee gulped too fast, thoughts racing ahead to tasks and expectations, a constant undercurrent of not enough time. But today, she stayed still. She listened. The hum of distant traffic. A bird calling from the oak tree outside. The subtle rhythm of her own breathing. It felt unfamiliar. It felt spacious. She slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen. The sun was rising now, painting the walls with pale gold. She brewed coffee slowly, noticing the sound of water filling the pot, the scent blooming into the air. Ellie shuffled in wearing mismatched socks. "You're up early," Ellie mumbled. "So are you," Mara smiled. They stood side by side at the counter, not saying much. In the past, silence between them might have felt awkward, like something that needed to be filled with instructions, reminders, plans. But now it felt easy. "I had a dream," Ellie said after a minute. "I was running, but not because I was late. Just because it felt good." Mara turned that over in her mind. "When was the last time you ran just because it felt good?" she asked gently. Ellie shrugged. "I don't know." After breakfast, instead of moving straight into chores and errands, Mara made a quiet decision. "Let's walk," she said. "Walk where?" Ellie asked. "Nowhere special." They stepped outside. Maple Street was stretching awake, garage doors lifting, sprinklers ticking, Mrs. Chen sweeping her porch. "Morning," Mrs. Chen called. "No destination today?" "Not today," Mara replied. They walked slowly. No headphones. No agenda. Mara noticed things she hadn't before. The way light filtered through new leaves, the small crack in the sidewalk shaped like a lightning bolt, the scent of someone baking bread nearby. Ellie ran ahead for a moment, then slowed to match her pace. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you ever feel like you're behind?" The question landed softly but honestly. "All the time," Mara admitted. "Behind what?" Mara smiled. "An invisible clock. Other people's timelines. Versions of myself I thought I'd be by now." Ellie considered that. "Are we actually behind?" she asked. Mara looked down the street, at Mr. Alvarez laughing with a neighbor, at Mrs. Chen adjusting a wind chime, at sunlight warming ordinary houses. "No," she said finally. "I think we just forget that life isn't a race." They reached the end of the street and turned back. Nothing extraordinary had happened. No dramatic breakthroughs. No life-altering conversations. Just a morning. But it felt different. Back home, Mara didn't rush to fill the rest of the day. She let it unfold. Laundry folded in its time. Dishes washed without hurry. A book read in the afternoon light. She realized something subtle but powerful. Rushing had once made her feel productive. Slowing down made her feel present. That evening, Jonah came home to find her sitting on the porch steps, watching the sky turn pink. "You look peaceful," he said. "I didn't rush today," she replied. And nothing fell apart. He laughed softly. As the first star appeared, Mara felt the truth settle deeper inside her. Healing wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was choosing not to hurry through your own life. Sometimes it was a morning that didn't need to be optimized. Sometimes it was a walk to nowhere in particular, and discovering you weren't behind at all. The world would still spin. The clock would still tick. But tonight, as she leaned back against the porch railing, Mara felt something steady within her. She wasn't catching up. She wasn't falling behind. She was simply living forward. The rain started just after noon. Not a dramatic storm. No thunder cracking the sky. Just a steady, patient rainfall that softened everything it touched. Mara stood at the kitchen window, watching droplets gather on the glass. Years ago, rain like this would have unsettled her. Gray skies used to echo whatever heaviness she was carrying. Rain had once felt like confirmation that the world could dim without warning. But today, it felt different. It felt like permission. Permission to stay inside. Permission to slow down. Permission to feel whatever surfaced. Ellie was sprawled on the living room floor with colored pencils, sketching something abstract and bright. Jonah was working at the dining table, the soft tapping of his keyboard blending with the rain's rhythm. The house felt alive in a quiet way. Mara made tea instead of coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug and sat on the couch without turning on the television. Outside, Maple Street blurred into watercolor, houses softened by mist, trees swaying gently. The rain kept falling. And with it, memories rose. Not sharp ones. Not painful in the way they used to be. Just moments. A rainy afternoon years ago when she had sat alone in a small apartment, listening to the same sound but feeling entirely different. Back then, the silence had felt loud. The space had felt empty instead of restful. She realized something now. The rain hadn't changed. She had. Mom? Ellie's voice floated toward her. Why do people say rainy days are sad? Mara thought about that. I think sometimes we mistake quiet for sadness, she answered. But quiet can just be quiet. Ellie nodded thoughtfully and returned to her drawing. Around 3 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Mara opened it to find Mrs. Chen standing under a pale blue umbrella. I baked too much, Mrs. Chen said, holding out a tin. Rain makes me nostalgic. Inside were still warm sesame cookies. Come in, Mara said. Soon the three of them were sitting around the kitchen table, steam rising from teacups, rain tapping steadily overhead. Mrs. Chen spoke about her childhood, monsoon seasons, crowded kitchens, her mother humming while stirring soup. Jonah joined them, closing his laptop without hesitation. For a while, the house felt like a small sanctuary from the outside world. Mara noticed how different this rainy day felt from the ones she used to endure. She wasn't trying to escape it. She wasn't distracting herself from it. She was inside it, present. When Mrs. Chen left, she paused at the doorway. Rain washes more than streets, she said gently. Mara watched her walk carefully back home, umbrella bobbing slightly in the gray light. By early evening, the rain slowed to a mist. Mara stepped onto the porch alone. The air smelled clean, earthy and fresh. The pavement shimmered. A small puddle reflected the sky like a mirror. She realized something subtle. Rain doesn't ask permission to fall. It doesn't apologize for darkening the sky. It simply does what it needs to do. And eventually, it stops. Mara had spent years resisting her own emotional weather. Trying to outthink it, rush through it, cover it with noise. But now she understood. Some days are bright. Some days are heavy. Both belong. Both pass. As the clouds began to break, a thin strip of sunlight appeared on the horizon. Not dramatic. Just enough. She felt it in her chest, a soft warmth spreading where tension used to sit. The rain hadn't ruined the day. It had deepened it. And standing there in the quiet aftermath, Mara felt something steady again. Healing wasn't about avoiding the gray. It was about learning that even gray days hold light. She stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind her. The house glowed warmly against the damp evening. And somewhere inside her, something once fragile felt rooted. Like a tree that had finally learned to trust the rain. It started with a question Mara almost didn't ask. The evening was calm. One of those soft blue nights where the sky lingers between day and dark. Maple Street was settling in. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically. A dog barked once, then quieted. Mara and Jonah sat on the porch steps, shoulders almost touching. For a while, they just watched the world dim. Can I ask you something? Mara said finally. Jonah glanced at her. Always. She hesitated. The old version of her avoided certain conversations. Not because they weren't important, but because she feared what they might uncover. Conflict used to feel like collapse. Questions used to feel like risk. But she had been learning something different. Honesty, when gentle, builds instead of breaks. Were you ever scared, she asked quietly, that we wouldn't make it through the hard years? Jonah didn't answer right away. The porch light flickered on automatically behind them. Yes, he said. There was no drama in his voice. Just truth. Mara felt something inside her relax. Me too, she admitted. They had never said it out loud before. There had been a stretch, years ago, when life felt like a balancing act on a thinning rope. Career changes, financial strain, grief that neither of them fully understood at the time. They had both tried to be the steady one. Sometimes that meant hiding fear from each other. I thought if I stayed strong enough, Jonah said slowly, it would carry both of us. I thought the same thing, Mara replied. They looked at each other and laughed softly. Two people, both trying to hold the sky up alone. You know what I realize now? Mara said. What? We didn't survive because one of us was stronger. Jonah tilted his head. We survived because neither of us left. The sentence settled between them like something sacred. Across the street, Mr. Alvarez was locking his gate. Mrs. Chen adjusted a potted plant near her door. The world was doing its ordinary, steady things. Jonah leaned back on his hands. I used to think love meant never doubting, he said. Now I think it means staying, even when you do. Mara let that sink in. There had been moments in the past when silence between them felt like distance. Now it felt like understanding. She realized something else too. Healing wasn't just individual. It rippled. It reshaped how she listened. How she asked. How she stayed. Do you ever miss who we were? She asked gently. Jonah considered. I miss parts of it, he admitted. But I wouldn't trade who we are now. She nodded. The younger versions of them had been hopeful, but fragile. This version felt quieter. Rooted. The porch light buzzed faintly above them. The sky darkened into full night. Mara reached for his hand. Not out of fear. Not out of needing reassurance. Just because she wanted to. Thank you, she said. For what? For staying. He squeezed her hand once. Thank you for learning how. They sat like that a little longer, letting the night settle around them. There would still be hard days. Still be misunderstandings. Still be moments when fear tried to whisper old stories. But tonight felt steady. Not because everything was perfect. But because everything was honest. As they stood to go inside, Mara felt something shift again, less like a breakthrough, more like a deepening. Love wasn't about never cracking. It was about choosing, again and again, to mend together. And under the soft porch light on Maple Street, she understood. Staying is a quiet kind of courage. One they had both learned. One they were still learning. Together. The air changed before anyone said it out loud. It was subtle at first. Mornings felt cooler. The light stretched differently across Maple Street, longer shadows, softer gold. The cicadas quieted. Leaves at the tops of the trees hinted at surrender. Summer was loosening its grip. Mara noticed it while folding laundry near the open window. A breeze slipped in, carrying something crisp and unfamiliar. Transition. She used to dislike this time of year. The space between seasons made her restless. It reminded her that nothing stays fixed. That even the good days eventually shift. But this year, she found herself paying attention instead of resisting. Outside, Ellie was helping Mr. Alvarez rake the first fallen leaves, even though it was too early for a real pile. They were laughing, tossing handfuls into the air like confetti. Mrs. Chen walked slowly down the sidewalk, wearing a light sweater for the first time in months. Change wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, almost kind. That afternoon, Mara cleaned out a drawer in the hallway, the one that always collected things without meaning to. Old batteries, forgotten receipts, keys to doors she no longer remembered. She spread everything across the table. In the past, she might have rushed the process. Tossed things quickly. Avoided looking too closely. But today she examined each item. Some belonged to a version of her that no longer existed. Some still mattered. Some simply needed to be released. Jonah came home carrying a paper bag of apples from a roadside stand outside town. Too early? He asked. Maybe, she smiled. But that's okay. They sliced them in the kitchen while Ellie told a story about school. The smell of apples and cinnamon filled the room. It felt like preparing for something, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Later that evening, Mara sat on the porch alone. The sky held that in-between color again, not summer blue, not autumn gray. Just becoming. She thought about how often she had feared transitions. The move that felt uncertain. The career shift that seemed risky. The seasons of grief that came without warning. She used to think change meant instability. Now she wondered if it meant growth. Mrs. Chen joined her quietly, lowering herself into the chair beside Mara. "You feel it too?" she asked. "The shift?" Mara nodded. Mrs. Chen smiled softly. "Every season teaches us something different." "And this one?" Mara asked. "Letting go without losing yourself." Mara let those words settle. Leaves would fall. The air would cool. The days would shorten. But the roots beneath the trees would remain. She had spent years fearing the falling. Now she trusted the rooting. As dusk deepened, she realized something gentle and steady. Life doesn't demand that we cling to what was. It invites us to step into what's next. Even when what's next is simply a quieter sky. Inside, Ellie was lighting a candle that smelled like cedarwood. Jonah was setting out blankets for movie night. The house felt warm against the cooling evening. Mara stood, taking one last look at the trees lining Maple Street. Some leaves had already begun to turn. Not because something was ending, but because something else was preparing to begin. She stepped back inside, closing the door softly behind her. The space between seasons didn't feel unsettling anymore. It felt honest. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't rush the becoming. She welcomed it. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No milestone. No dramatic realization. No music swelling in the background. Just a quiet moment in front of the bathroom mirror. Mara had just washed her face. Her hair was pulled back loosely. The morning light filtered through the frosted window, soft and unfiltered. For years, mirrors had felt like assessments. What's changed? What's faded? What didn't turn out the way you planned? She used to look at her reflection and see timelines. Expectations. Comparisons she never consciously agreed to but somehow carried anyway. But that morning, something felt different. She didn't rush. She didn't adjust the lighting. She didn't lean closer to inspect. She just looked. Not critically. Curiously. There were faint lines near her eyes, evidence of laughter, yes, but also of worry. A softness around her jaw that hadn't been there in her 20s. A steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there either. Ellie knocked lightly on the door. "Are you almost done?" "Yeah," Mara replied. But she stayed another moment. She realized how often she had spoken to herself in ways she would never speak to her daughter. Too harsh. Too demanding. Too unforgiving. The world already measured women enough. Why had she joined in? She touched the edge of the mirror lightly. "This is the face of someone who stayed," she whispered. "Stayed through change. Stayed through doubt. Stayed through healing." Downstairs, the smell of toast drifted upward. Jonah was humming faintly in the kitchen. Mara exhaled. She didn't suddenly feel transformed. She didn't suddenly love every angle or shadow. But she felt something shift from criticism to compassion. Later that afternoon, she found Ellie sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a magazine. "Do you ever wish you looked different?" Ellie asked casually, not looking up. The question caught Mara gently. "Yes," she said honestly. "I used to. And now? Now I try to focus on how I feel instead of how I look." Ellie nodded, absorbing that. Mara sat beside her. "There's nothing wrong with wanting to feel confident," she added. "But confidence doesn't come from fixing yourself. It comes from understanding you were never broken." Ellie leaned against her shoulder. Outside, Maple Street moved in its steady rhythm, mail delivered, dogs walked, leaves shifting in the breeze. That evening, when Mara brushed her teeth, she caught her reflection again. This time, she smiled, not the practiced smile for photos. A small, private one. She understood something now. Aging wasn't evidence of loss. It was proof of living. The lines around her eyes meant she had laughed. The softness meant she had rested. The steadiness meant she had endured. She turned off the bathroom light and stepped into the hallway. Forgiveness didn't always require another person. Sometimes it meant forgiving your own reflection. for not being younger, for not being flawless, for not being who you thought you'd be by now. As she slipped into bed that night, Mara felt lighter. Not because she had changed, but because she had stopped fighting herself. And in that quiet surrender, something beautiful happened. She began to see herself the way she would see someone she loved. With kindness, with patience, with grace. It was a Saturday when the invitation came. Not a grand opportunity, not a life-changing offer. Just a small yes waiting to happen. Mrs. Chen knocked on the door just after breakfast, holding a folded flyer. "There's a community art fair next weekend," she said. "They're looking for volunteers. Nothing complicated, just helping set up tables, welcoming people." Mara glanced at the paper. In another season of her life, she would have smiled politely and said, "Maybe next time." She used to guard her energy carefully, not because she didn't care, but because she felt stretched thin by everything. Even small commitments felt overwhelming. "I'll think about it," she replied. But the words felt different this time. She didn't mean no. She meant maybe. Later that afternoon, she found Ellie sitting at the kitchen table, painting tiny watercolor leaves. "Do you think I'm good at this?" Ellie asked. "You're enjoying it," Mara said. "That's not what I asked." Mara smiled. "I think trying matters more than being perfect." Ellie dipped her brush back into green. "Are you going to help at the art fair?" she asked casually. Mara paused. "I'm not sure." Ellie tilted her head. "Why not?" It wasn't criticism, just curiosity. Mara thought about it honestly. "Because what if I'm awkward? What if I don't know anyone? What if I say yes and regret it?" The fears weren't loud anymore, but they still whispered. Jonah came in from the backyard, brushing dirt from his hands. "What's the debate?" he asked. "Mom's deciding if she wants to help at the art fair," Ellie said. Jonah shrugged lightly. "Sounds like something you'd enjoy. Or something I'll overthink," Mara replied. He smiled. "You don't have to decide who you'll be at the event. Just decide if you'll show up." That stayed with her. That evening, as the sky faded into lavender and gold, Mara walked across the street to Mrs. Chen's house. She didn't rehearse what to say. She didn't overanalyze. She simply knocked. Mrs. Chen opened the door, already smiling. "Yes?" she asked gently. "I'll help," Mara said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bold. But it felt like something. A small yes. A yes to being part of something outside her comfort zone. A yes to stepping forward without knowing every outcome. On the walk back home, she felt a quiet energy inside her, not anxious, not pressured. Alive. She realized she had spent years waiting to feel fully ready before saying yes to new things. But readiness wasn't a requirement. Willingness was. When she stepped back into the house, Ellie looked up expectantly. "Well?" "I said yes." Ellie grinned. "See? That wasn't scary." Mara laughed softly. "It was a little. Did you do it anyway?" "Yes." Ellie nodded like that was the most natural thing in the world. That night, lying in bed, Mara thought about how healing isn't always about big breakthroughs. Sometimes it's about tiny expansions. A conversation you don't avoid. A truth you don't swallow. An invitation you don't decline out of fear. Just a small yes. And sometimes, that small yes opens a door you didn't even realize you were ready to walk through. Maple Street was quiet again. But inside her, something was widening. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just steadily. Forward. The morning of the art fair arrived wrapped in golden light. Maple Street felt different, brighter somehow. Folding tables lined the small community park at the end of the block. White tents fluttered gently in the early breeze. Someone tested a speaker with soft instrumental music that drifted through the air like a welcome. Mara stood at the edge of the park holding a clipboard. For a brief second, the old hesitation returned. You could still go home. No one would blame you. But then Mrs. Chen waved from beneath a half-assembled canopy. "You came," she called warmly. "I said I would," Mara replied. And she meant it. The morning moved quickly. She helped arrange handmade ceramics on linen-covered tables. She tied ribbons around jars of homemade jam. She directed a local high school student to the sign-in sheet. None of it was complicated. But it mattered. At first, she felt slightly outside of everything, as if she were observing instead of belonging. Then a woman approached her table. "Do you know where the watercolor booth is?" the woman asked. Mara glanced at the map. "Right past the oak tree," she said. "Second tent on the left." "Thank you," the woman smiled. It was a small exchange. But something shifted. She wasn't just present, she was part of it. By noon, the park buzzed gently with life. Children ran between booths holding cotton candy. Elderly couples examined paintings carefully. Mr. Alvarez sold out of his hand-carved birdhouses within an hour. Ellie sat at a folding table, proudly displaying her tiny watercolor leaves. When someone stopped to admire them, Ellie looked up at her mom. Mara gave her a subtle nod. Later, a young mother with tired eyes paused near the welcome table. "This is really beautiful," she said softly. "I almost didn't come. I almost didn't volunteer," Mara admitted before she could overthink it. The woman smiled in understanding. "Glad we both showed up then." That sentence stayed with her. Glad we both showed up. As the afternoon light softened, Jonah arrived carrying lemonade. He leaned close and whispered, "You look like you belong here." Mara looked around. Mrs. Chen laughing beneath the tent. Ellie explaining her painting process with serious concentration. Neighbors she once only waved to now sharing stories. She realized something important. Belonging isn't something you wait to be granted. It's something you step into. When the event began to wind down, volunteers folded chairs and packed away decorations. The park slowly returned to its ordinary shape. But it didn't feel ordinary. It felt fuller. As they walked home together, Ellie slipped her hand into Mara's. "Are you glad you said yes?" she asked. Mara didn't hesitate. Yes. Not because the day had been extraordinary, but because she had crossed a quiet line inside herself. She had chosen participation over protection, connection over caution, presence over fear. That evening, as the sun set behind Maple Street, Mara felt something settle deeply. Healing isn't just about inner peace. It's about re-entering the world gently, trusting that you can show up as you are. No performance, no perfection, just willingness. She had thought courage was loud once, but today proved otherwise. Sometimes courage is simply arriving and staying. Autumn arrived fully the following week. Leaves turned without apology. The air sharpened. Maple Street shifted into warmer colors, amber, rust, deep gold. Mara stood at the window one early morning, watching a single leaf loosen from its branch. It didn't fall dramatically. It drifted, unhurried, trusting the ground would meet it. She wrapped her sweater tighter and stepped outside with a mug of coffee. The street was quiet, still stretching awake. Mrs. Chen's porch light flickered off. Mr. Alvarez bent to gather his newspaper. Everything felt steady. Not perfect. Not finished. Just steady. She thought about the months behind her. The night of flickering lights. The letters she never sent. The morning she didn't rush. The rainy afternoon. The porch step conversation. The shift between seasons. The forgiveness in the mirror. The small yes. The art fair. None of them had changed her overnight. But together, they had. Healing, she realized, hadn't come like a wave. It had come like seasons. Gradual. Quiet. Certain. Ellie stepped outside, holding a scarf loosely around her neck. "It smells like fall," she said. "It does," Mara smiled. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Ellie asked suddenly. The question floated between them. Mara considered it carefully. There were versions of her that had been younger. Faster. Less certain, but less marked by experience. But going back would mean unlearning everything she now understood. "No," she said gently. "I think I like moving forward." Ellie nodded as if that made perfect sense. Jonah joined them, slipping an arm around Mara's shoulders. "What are we reflecting on this morning?" he teased. "Nothing heavy," she replied. "Just life." They stood together in the cool air. A neighbor jogged past. A car engine started down the street. Somewhere, a wind chime sang softly. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary morning. And yet, it felt like something complete. Mara realized she no longer woke up bracing for the day. She no longer scanned the horizon for what might go wrong. She wasn't chasing a future version of herself anymore. She was here, rooted, Open. Becoming without urgency. The leaf she'd watched earlier now rested on the pavement. It had not resisted the fall. It had simply trusted the next phase. That was what living forward meant. Not forgetting the past. Not rushing the future. But stepping into each day with gentleness instead of fear. With curiosity instead of doubt. With presence instead of pressure. Ellie tugged at her hand. Can we walk before school? To nowhere in particular? Mara asked. Ellie grinned. Exactly. They stepped off the porch together. Maple Street stretched ahead, familiar and yet always changing. The sky above was wide and clear. And as Mara walked, she felt something calm and undeniable settle inside her. She didn't need to go back. She didn't need to hurry ahead. She only needed to keep moving. Softly, bravely, forward.